Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us this Sunday for another edition of Bible for Friends. So we're studying one book of the Bible at a time, verse by verse. And this week we're in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 11. We're getting very close to finishing this book, and we've learned a lot. The preacher definitely had a lot of wisdom to share. And I think the general consensus is that there's a lot to take away and apply to our lives, especially now that we're in the days of our youth. And now in chapters 11 and 12, the preacher's going to start focusing on his audience. His specific audience is going to be young people, because those are the people that usually have the least amount of wisdom, the least amount of experience. And so the amazing thing is that we can add experience to ourselves as young people by listening to the wisdom of people with more experience, with more wisdom. And so today, Spencer, he prepared an amazing chapter for us, chapter 11. I've got a few verses to cover, and if we have time, we'll continue with chapter 12. All right, Spencer, take it away.
All righty. Hey, everyone. Here's Ecclesiastes chapter 7.
Chapter 11.
Chapter 11. Did I say 7? Oopsie. It talks about the number 7 in here. That's why I said that. But all right. So I kind of divided the readings. It's 10 verses. So I divided it in half. But then later on, I have like some like deep dives for like a couple to like one verse at a time. So Josh, if you want to start off and do the first reading for us.
Sure thing. Verse 1 says, "Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a portion to 7 or even to 8, for you know not what disaster may happen on earth. If the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth. And if a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it will lie. He who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. As you do not know the way the spirit comes to the bones in the womb of a child with in the womb of a woman with child, so you do not know the work of God who makes everything."
Perfect. Thank you. So yeah, looking at verse 1 and 2. So he says, "Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days." So I found two cool allusions to this. So one being to the element of trust and like ancient business, right? So like back in the day, if you were to invest in a company, right, or a business, you might not see profit till later because of very long voyages, right? Like across the oceans or across a vast variety of places. But also, there used to be a custom where after a meal, that that the owner or the master of the feast would distribute several parts to each guest, and send portions to the poor, leftovers from the meal. So I wanted to ask you guys, do you think this is alluding to giving to the needy or investing in a business? So that's kind of up for discussion.
Jared, do you have any ideas?
I've got the gears turning right now. I'm not sure.
And then maybe to elaborate a little bit before you answer. So the next verse gives a little bit more. It says, "Give a portion to 7 or even to 8, for you know not what disaster may happen on earth." And I kind of took that like, let's say you invest in a company, right? But it's always good sense to invest in multiple different companies. So here, if you take the business route, is give a portion to 7 businesses and even to 8, for you don't know what's going to go wrong with one, right? Or it could mean that to give to 7 different needy people, right? Or maybe even 8, because you don't know when disaster might strike all these different needy people. So with that in mind, maybe that helps sway your answer or not. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, but me personally, I think it's alluding to the feast, giving to the poor, and I have Bible verses to support that next, but I kind of wanted to get you guys' thoughts as well.
Wow, I like that first interpretation that it talks about giving to those who are in need. But I could also see the other way, investing in a business, because in verse 2 it talks about the idea of not putting all your eggs in one basket, because if that basket doesn't provide, then you're going to be left with nothing. So you want to divide your portions to different ventures to reduce your risk. But then the way that it uses, the imagery of casting your bread upon waters, and you will find it after many days. For some reason, that makes me think of allusions to Jesus and his ministry. Makes me think of him breaking bread with his disciples, and bread representing his body. And the waters, I've heard, that represent nations. In Israel, they have one of their coasts is the Mediterranean Sea, and basically that sea would connect Israel to all the other nations, Greece, Rome, all the other empires, and now Europe were connected through that sea. And so that represented the nations, and it also kind of represented it makes me think of spreading the gospel. And then the seeds from that giving fruit much later. That's what I'm thinking.
That's another cool way to look at it, for sure. Because yeah, it's important here to note, like, for you will find it after many days. So I think that's a good explanation there, right? The seeds being planted and then them blossoming later as what you find after many days. I think if you get to the needy, maybe you find spiritual blessings right above the sun after death, but also maybe if they're talking about investing like under the sun, right, in businesses, that you would see returns after many days while being patient, right? So I kind of saw, that's cool that you brought that into perspective. So I guess 3 different ways this could go. But yeah, all right, I'll go over to so I kind of have some relevant scripture here. So in 2 Samuel 6:19, it says here, and distributed among all the people the whole multitude of Israel, both men and women, a cake of bread, a portion of meat, and a cake of raisins to each one. Then all the people departed, each to his house. So here we see an example of food being distributed. We see another command right here that says, go your way, eat the fat and drink sweet wine, and send portions to anyone who has nothing ready, for this day is holy to our Lord, and do not be grieved, for the joy of the Lord is your strength. And then the last example I was able to find was in Esther. So as the days on which the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month that had been turned for them from sorrow into gladness, and from mourning into a holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and gladness, days for sending gifts of food to one another and gifts to the poor. So that kind of led me to the conclusion that it's talking about like giving to others, right? Which kind of goes along with what we've been studying as well in the chapter. But I definitely really like your take on it, Josh. And then the business, I feel like that's relevant as well.
That's so cool. I like those connections.
Yep.
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
For Nehemiah 8, what feast was that referring to? Like of the holy feasts that are mentioned in the Torah?
I don't know which feast exactly. Maybe you can Google it real quick if you like. But I kind of took it a little bit out of context.
I think it applies.
Yeah.
Verse 10.
Right?
On the first day of the 7th month. I think it was just the day when
I feel like it might be talking about the Sabbath, right? Because it says send to people who have nothing ready, because they would prepare food before the holy day, right? The Sabbath.
Yes.
That's what I think at first glance, but I'm not sure.
Yes, and in Judaism, the Sabbath is a day where they eat an abundance of food. Like there's always, when we were in Jerusalem, we got to do an event where you have Sabbath at a Jewish family's home, and the amount of food that had was insane. Like they were trying to stuff us.
Yeah, so
But
maybe it's alluding to that, I think.
yeah, pretty
Okay.
cool. Just curious.
Yep. Then yeah, so verses 3 and 4. So we have a few different like cause and effects right here. So if the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth. And if a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it will lie. So I kind of wrote down, world is ruled by fixed laws that man cannot control. I also found online there are a few people who might refer the tree to as like a metaphor to eternity, right? Like once you fall like south or north, like you can't change like where you're going after you die. But I don't know if that's correct based on the context here, right? I just thought it would be cool to add. Um, and then also, he who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. So I kind of wrote about that. Don't be over analytical, like about life, right? So can you guys think of any example in your life where you were waiting for perfect conditions, like quote unquote, to do something? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that I could kind of tie to, and this is something I talked about with you guys before we started today, learning a new skill. I think you try to wait for, conditions to be just right to start on like a new venture, a new project, and when really you should just, there's no time like the present, just start on it now, and just kind of go along with it, as time goes, and that's probably the best path, because if you wait, then you never know when you might have needed to start sooner.
Mm, that's true. The one that comes to mind for me is this Bible study. I feel like I was thinking the other day that it would have been awesome if we would have started something like this when we were in USF. We had maybe a little bit more time, to pass. And I know you had the initiative and you started something, Spencer, with a lot of your friends. And
Yeah.
I thought that was amazing. But uh, I am not very good at public speaking and just explaining things, and so I let that kind of quiet me. And I thought I had to learn a lot more about the Bible to teach, and I had to have much better understanding. But now I'm realizing that like I can learn as we can learn together. As I prepare for a study, then I have to learn it, from scratch. And as I teach it, I learn it again. And so you don't have to be somebody who's very knowledgeable in the Bible, but you just get a group of people together, and it can give a lot of good fruits. Yeah, it would have been cool to have started earlier. Who knows how many more people would be here today?
Yeah, for sure. And I know myself right now, like I've been struggling like physically wise. I'm very out of shape and I should probably be running more often. And I keep waiting I have all these excuses, right? Like, oh, it's too hot outside. Oh, it's during the day. Oh, it's raining, right? Like I make all these excuses not to run every day, right? But as time goes on, it will bite me in the end, if we do have like a soccer league and I'm not able to perform, right? So that's just like a simple example that came to my mind in terms of like waiting for perfect conditions to do something. So I guess, like Jared said, the time is now. There's no time like the present. And that's something to kind of take away from this. And then I also wrote down, trust God to sow and reap. So like, for example, if you never sow, right, if you never plant the seed, if you're always worried about, hey, and this is just a metaphor, but hey, like the wind's just gonna take my seeds away, then you're never ever gonna have anything grow. And then if you're worrying about the clouds all the time and it raining, you're never gonna like reap your harvest, right? So you just have to kind of do it and then trust God for the results, right, to come.
Hmm.
So that's the takeaway. All right, and then verse 5, I put two different translations, and you'll see they're a little bit different when you look at it. But let's look at the ESV first. So, as you do not know the way the Spirit comes to the bones in the womb of a woman with child, so you do not know the work of God who makes everything. And then the NASB says, just as you do not know the path of the wind and how bones are formed in the womb of the pregnant woman, so you do not know the activity of God who makes everything. I think the ESV might be a more literal translation, but I included the both of them so I could connect it to this verse here. But I kind of wrote here, like, this kind of shows us our limitations of human knowledge, right? That the preacher has talked about in previous chapters. Only God can know certain aspects of life, right? Like, we'll never know things like if you're on a football field, right, and you're about to kick a field goal, you never know if the wind's going to all of a sudden like change direction, and then the kick will go far left. You just don't know. And then I connected this to John 3:8, where Jesus says, the wind blows where it wishes and you hear its sound, but you do not know where it comes from or where it goes. So it is with everyone who is born of the Spirit. So Jesus here, I don't know if he's alluding to this verse exactly, but he definitely makes a connection to like the wind, how no one knows where it's going, and the Spirit. No one knows how the Spirit works except for God himself. Like, we know of the power of the Spirit, right? The Holy Spirit, but we don't know, we can't comprehend that power, right? Just like we can't comprehend the creation, like how all of that was created by one person. And that, just thinking about this can humble us, right, in the presence of God, and really see what he's capable of, right? So, and then right here, I guess if you take the more literal translation, as you do not know the way the Spirit comes to the bones in the womb, maybe it's talking about like the life maybe in the womb compared to like the path of the wind and how bones are formed. I also saw a note in the ESV though that there's certain like Hebrew manuscripts that have it written this way. So maybe that's where the NASB gets that from. So it's just something I wanted to show, two different translations, but essentially the same thing, right? Any comments about this verse?
I like your conclusion that this teaches us to be humble and become before God.
Yep, very good. All righty. All right, second half. Jared, you want to do some reading?
Absolutely. In the morning sow your seed, and at evening withhold not your hand, for you do not know which will prosper, this or that, or whether both alike will be good. Light is sweet, and it is pleasant for the eyes to see the sun. So if a person lives many years, let him rejoice in them all, but let him remember that the days of darkness will be many. All that comes is vanity. Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and the sight of your eyes. But know that for all these things, God will bring you into judgment. Remove vexation from your heart and put away pain from your body, for youth and the dawn of life are vanity.
Perfect. Thank you. So starting with verse 6, it says, in the morning sow your seed, and at evening withhold not your hand, for you do not know which will prosper, this or that, or whether both alike will be good. So I kind of took that as, of course, we cannot predict the future, right? This verse seems to be saying work both morning and night in case one aspect of your work fails. So let's say back in the day you were a sower, right? And the way you made money was at the end of your harvest. But what if for whatever reason that specific year you don't really have a good harvest, right? You don't have many crops to reap. So it's always good to kind of have like a backup way of finding income, right? Is what I kind of like took from this. So I put this applies for other scenarios besides sowing your seed. So can you guys think of any like scenarios? Because I kind of see sowing your seed is like a metaphor, right? Because obviously back in the day, not everyone had that job, right? So can you guys think of any scenarios besides this?
So you're, just to confirm, you're asking more for like almost like a synonym to like sowing your seed.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
Basically. And it
So
doesn't have to apply to you, it can just be any example in general.
right. I mean, I think on just like a general basis, it's whatever like whatever talent you have, whatever has been designated as like your like occupation, right? Like that's, to me, that's how I think about it. Like you're in the morning, you're performing your tasks that you have been like set to do, right? Um, like in this case, like it says sowing your seeds. So like if you're a farmer, you're going out, you're planting your crops, right? But for somebody else that, I don't know, back then maybe you were um, I don't know, I'm trying to think, like a blacksmith, and maybe you create weapons for like the local government, right? For their military or whatever. Like whatever your task is to do, like that's what you're doing.
Very good.
Yeah.
Josh, anything come to mind?
Related to what Jared was saying about our talents, I think you could also look at it in terms of our life, stages of our life. So the morning could represent our youth when we're young, and motivating us, encouraging us to take advantage of this time. We have energy, we have a lot of talent, develop, to work really hard. And even when we grow older, still maintaining that attitude of working hard, of not being lazy, because you never know, what's going to happen in the end, what's going to be the outcome of your life later in life. It's better to start sowing your seed now, because you won't be able to go back to the morning. You won't be able to go back to your younger days when you get to your older days, And it also made me think of a piece of advice that I heard the other day, which is never think about retiring, because once you start thinking about retiring, you start. It's almost like you get senioritis. You start becoming complacent, lazy, and so as long as you always have a mentality of I'm always going to give 110%, I'm always going to work hard. When I wake up every day with that mentality, then a lot of things are going to go well with you, and you're not going to run into burnout or just complacency. And so I feel like that relates to this too. It's just like throughout all the stages of our lives, work hard, because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
Yep. So keep in mind the future. Very
Yeah.
good. All righty. And then verse 7 and 8, it says, light is sweet and it is pleasant for the eyes to see the sun. So back in the day, well, and maybe even today, like the sun is considered so pleasant that even the heathens worship it, right? And that's kind of where we get the first day of the week is named after the sun, right? We have Sunday that comes from, I think it was like a Greek goddess or something like that, where they actually worshipped the sun. And it's kind of cool it's not cool that they worship the sun instead of God, right? But it's cool to see how people saw it as something so magnificent that they saw worth in worshiping like the sun. Out of all things, right? They worship the sun, and they even named the very first day of the week after that. So I wrote, be careful not to love life under the sun too much. So verse 8 says, so if a person lives many years, let him rejoice in them all, but let him remember that the days of darkness will be many, and all that comes is vanity. So I asked a question here. I said, is the preacher talking about days of darkness during life? So like old life, sorrows, misfortune, or darkness in the grave? What do you guys think here?
I think it has to, well, the way that I'm reading it, to me, it makes sense for it to be like during life, because it's mentioning a person living many years. And so in this sense, I think it's right. Because if you, uh, shoot, I'm kind of losing my thought, but basically it's tying that into me more in life under the sun, not above, because it's like, I don't know, it's giving a sense of like a limited amount of time. So it's just kind of my thoughts.
Do you have anything, Josh?
Yeah, I would say the same thing. Makes me not trust as much time we have under the sun and look forward to what comes after. But here doesn't really give you that much hope about what comes after. It says the days of darkness will be many. I feel like that refers to that could refer to old age when our bodies start deteriorating, or it could refer to the grave. I don't know. Good question.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of lean more towards this side of he's talking about like the actual days of your life, right? Because I know the afterlife was like kind of an untouched topic in the Old Testament. So yeah, and then my final thought I wrote down was remember to keep death in mind, even at times when life is so sweet, right? So let's say it says, let him rejoice in them all, but also remember that the days of darkness will be many. So if it is alluding to death, somehow, which I think old life sorrows, as you approach death, that's kind of where the days of darkness can happen, right? Just keep in mind when life is so sweet to remember like that's where it's talking about all that comes as vanity, right? Like just remember it's temporary and eventually everyone has the same days of darkness, coming for them. So
I think verse 8 really ties back to like the whole central idea of Ecclesiastes, or at least one of them, which is, basically enjoy the good days and accept them fully and expect the bad days to come and just, keep that perspective.
exactly, yeah, and you're gonna see that same conclusion in these next two verses. So in verse 9 it says he's addressing like young men here, right? So he says, rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you, or let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. So here he's addressing specifically the young man. And then he says, walk in the ways of your heart and the sight of your eyes, but know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment. So why do you guys think the preacher tells the young man to walk in the ways of your heart and sight, knowing that doing this will bring you into judgment? And also consider what judgment might mean here, right? I personally don't think it means like the final judgment, when like God's judgment. I think it but let's see what you guys think here. I think the question is on what does judgment here mean? And then why is the preacher telling you to do these things knowing that it brings you into judgment?
So my initial thought in this is that maybe he's expecting us to sin. And so like, when you're walking in the ways of your heart and the side of your eyes, like there'll be times when, you're going to be tempted and it could be sinful. And then other times it may not be. So like it could be like a mixed bag kind of result. And then therefore that would bring you into judge. I mean, we're judged whether we do good or bad, right? Whether we sin or we don't. And I think it's just kind of keeping the perspective that it's like a mix of both. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's one of the things that came to mind, and I kind of struggled with these two verses a little bit because I didn't know like if it was talking about like sin, or if it was talking about being thankful for the days that you do have, and not I guess not being thankful for them. But what do you got, Josh?
Yeah, this verse is interesting.
Yeah.
I think Jared has a good point where he says that it could be a little bit of both. It could be talking about having sinful ways or ways of not sinning, living righteous life. But I think the key is the final verse, or the final part of verse 9, where it says that God's gonna it's like reminding the young person that God's gonna bring everything that he does into judgment because he knows everything that we do. He's aware of everything. There's nothing we can hide from him. The thing that gets me is it seems like it's encouraging to walk in the ways of your heart,
That's what was getting me as well.
because
And
that makes me think, our heart is not to be followed. We're supposed to be following something else.
yeah, and that got me to think that maybe here it's talking about just like taking pleasure as you're young, right? And I kind of have like a little conclusion in the conclusion slide about this that I came to, but I put consider judgment when walking in the ways of your heart and sight and be thankful. If it is talking about sin, though, be cautious when walking in the ways of your heart and sight, because like that's how you can lust after things that are negative, right? But then looking at verse 10, maybe this puts a little more context into things, but it says, remove vexation from your heart and put away pain from your body, for youth and the dawn of life are vanity. So vexation means, I looked up the definition, it means being like annoyed, frustrated, or worried. So I had written down, remove being annoyed, frustrated, and worried by lowering your expectations. So by lowering your expectations, that can help you like not be like angry and upset all the time, right? Like we shouldn't live our lives being like upset, like, right? Like why should we be upset? We should be thankful that we're even alive, right? So and then I put down, put away your sorrows, right? Put away the pain from your body. This was another verse right here I did a lot of digging into on what put away the pain from your body means. There's also other translations that say put away like evil from your flesh, right? So that might be alluding to like like treating your body as a temple. I'm not I think this is the more literal translation though. So I kind of just put away sorrows for that part. And then for youth and the dawn of life for vanity. So I put childhood and living in your prime, which is the dawn of life, are both vanity, as temporary pleasures will eventually pass away. So that's kind of what I took from here. Do you guys have anything to add?
I like what your conclusion for the second part, where it says take away pain from your body. It could relate to sin, treating our body as a temple, and there's certain sins like in the New Testament, it says that sexual sin is sin that's against our body, and so taking away those things that make us impure. It talks about removing sin, especially in the physical sense of our body. Yep. I like that. I would agree with that idea.
Yeah. Yep. Alrighty, and then I have a few conclusions here on the left, and then we'll go over this verse to cap things off. But I wanted to make sure we have some takeaways, that we can take home. So, one, giving to the needy results in blessings above the sun. Investing in companies results in blessings under the sun. So I wanted to make those two distinctions. The world is ruled by fixed laws that man cannot control. Trust God to sow and reap. Only God can know certain aspects of life. We cannot predict the future. Be careful not to love life under the sun too much. Maintain like a healthy balance. Remember to keep death in mind, even at times when life is so sweet. Consider judgment when walking in the ways of your heart and sight. And then the final conclusion that I think he's trying to make in chapter 11, the chapter before the end of Ecclesiastes, is he urges the young man to enjoy life by embracing what it is. So true enjoyment requires that we not be captured by circumstances of grief and anger, nor be lured into evil, which leads to slavery and loss. So I kind of like put grief and anger as well as not being lured into evil, right? Which will ultimately lead to loss. And then I really liked this verse. I felt like it connected really well. So how do you know what your life will be like tomorrow? Your life is like the morning fog. It's here a little while, then it's gone. So I thought that was a cool verse to tie this into.
Seems like James was pretty well studied in Ecclesiastes.
Yeah. So
wow. I really like the conclusions.
Morning fog. Yeah, I feel like fog is kind of like Havel, you know, like it's kind of like vanity. You can't see it, right?
Mhm. Same idea.
You're
I was
you're
going to
like,
add something to the conclusion number 9 in that
yeah,
verse that was a little bit hard to understand.
yeah.
I remember now reading the other day a portion from the book of Numbers,
Mhm.
Numbers 15. That was a chapter that has a lot of commandments that God is instructing to the Israelites for when they get to the promised land, that they should give um, peace offerings to God,
Yep.
share it with everybody. And then it talks about two different kinds of sin. It talks about offerings for sin that is unintentional or sin committed without knowledge. So like
Mm.
sin that you commit by mistake, you didn't really know it was a sin. God says you still have to give, uh, you still have to give an offering for that sin to be atoned for it. And then there was another sin that was a sin committed with almost like with vexation, with uh, a sense of rebelliousness, where you're just you think you're right and God's wrong, so you're not really repenting for your sin.
Mm.
And in that instruction, God was telling the Israelites that if somebody commits that kind of sin, cut them off from your people. And right after that, there were two events that happened of somebody having that type of sin. And you can see that right away the two things that happens to them they seem very harsh. But in context of what God was saying there, that if somebody's not going to recognize that something that they did that was wrong is sin, it's almost like they're blaspheming the name of God because they're saying,
Mhm. So if
God,
their
you're
heart
wrong.
goes against God's word, basically,
Yeah,
for that one, yeah.
exactly. And so one of those cases was a man who was just gathering sticks on the Sabbath.
Oh,
It
I
seems
remember this.
seems pretty innocent, you know. So it seems like that first type of sin where you commit a sin because you didn't know, and you still have to offer something for it to be forgiven. But obviously, this man, it says that he was brought before the congregation, and they were going to judge him. Um, but Moses asked God, what should they do with the man? And God told him, kill the man and stone him, execute him. His penalty is a death sentence. And you think, that's a little bit excessive, like that escalated quickly. But in the context of those two verses, um, of those two cases of sin, the unintentional sin and the sin committed by rebelliousness, uh, if it was a sin that he committed by mistake, he could have simply given an offering for it and been forgiven, no problem. But just the fact that God said this man, he needs to be cut off, he needs to die, shows that it was a sin by rebellion.
Hmm.
Uh, and that's not as related to this topic, but there was another portion, the end of that chapter, that talked about this interesting instruction that God gave to the Israelites, which was he told them that they were to make these fringes at the four corners of their clothes that were supposed to be threaded with a blue or violet thread, and it was so that every time they look at it, they would remember that that God was their Lord, the one that's giving them instructions, and that they remember His commandments so that they do them. And then it gives this one line that's almost like parallel to this, where it says, and also so that you remember to not walk in the ways of your heart and in the ways of your sight. Um, so uh, I think the preacher, if he's referring to that portion, uh, he's telling young people, like, you have the opportunity to choose between walking in the ways of your heart or walking in the ways of your sight. He's not saying do that. You have the opportunity. Between walking in the ways of your heart or walking in the ways of God's heart or His commandments. And that's why the second line says, but remember that whatever you choose, you're going to be judged for that. And judging doesn't have to be negative. Judging could be positive. Like if you're judged to do something good, then you're going to be rewarded from it. And so I think maybe that was a connection that just came into my mind, but it took a long time to explain that. So yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think?
So if I'm understanding this, you're saying that maybe like a better way to reword the conclusion would be like something along the lines of understand you have an opportunity to basically walk in the ways of your heart and sight, or well, no, that's not exactly. I had thought better than that, but to basically, I don't know, to like give merit to like both sides. But then like you're also kind of thinking about it, you're defining that more as like that verse is talking about sin at that point, if you're making that conclusion.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I kind of am. But I like how Spencer put it here, because it's like, remember that whatever ways that you choose, you're going to be judged for it, whether for good, for being rewarded, for keeping God's, whether pleasing God or not pleasing God. Right.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, remember how Solomon's been kind of been negative this whole chapter, saying everything's Haval, what's the point of living, blah, blah, blah. I think this is a really good area where he makes a conclusion that that he urges us as young folk to enjoy life, right, by embracing what it is. And then he explains like how we can enjoy it, right? So I think he's trying to encourage us to enjoy life, and not be like worried with, grief, anger, like sorrow, all that stuff, right? But also keep in mind of death, that happens, right? Eventually, in dark days, right? I think those are the conclusions that he's making here. And again, he can be talking about sin there. I saw one interpretation where someone thought he could be talking about being thankful. Like if we're not thankful for our days, right, all the blessings God gives us in our life, then we'll be judged for that, right? And God won't be happy when we're not thankful for what he gives us, right? So that's another way to look at it. But I think I want to say, because it says heart and sight, right? Jesus talks a lot about your heart having issues, right? And then your sight causing you to lust and things like that. I think it's talking about judgment for doing like evil things, right? While also having freedom to use those. But that might, like you said, take it a little bit out of context here. So I just kept it sweet and simple. Like the conclusion is what it says, right? Consider judgment when walking the ways of your heart and sight.